I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. This episode is brought to you by Uber. You know Uber. Everybody knows Uber. If you don't already have an Uber account, go to the Support the Show page on my website, scroll down and click on the logo for Uber, and you will get $5 off your first 3 rides. Just because I sent you. How cool is that? So take advantage of that, and thanks for supporting the show.
Do you like eating sand? What about talc or titanium dioxide? The fact is, 99% of all vitamins on the market contain unnecessary and potentially toxic additives. That's why we've created Pure Vitamin Club. Our daily multicap is a carefully balanced formulation of the 13 essential vitamins plus 11 key minerals with no added ingredients of any kind. Just the nutrients your body needs to function at its best. But no vitamin will do you any good unless you actually take it. So we've made that easy for you. Pure Vitamin Club will deliver your vitamins to your door for pennies a day. Pure Vitamin Club.
Click on the Pure Vitamin Club bottle on the right side of the screen of this podcast webpage to get started.
Hey guys, this week's episode is Howie Abrams. Howie Abrams has been in the music industry for probably 30 years or more, and recently he became a book author, and his 4th book, Hip Hop Alphabet, is how I found him. So we have a nice chat, and he was nice enough to call in. We had some technical difficulties, and so he actually was cool enough to call in a second time and re-record some of the things that got lost. Without further ado, enjoy Howie Abrams, guys. All right. I want to welcome to the show Howie Abrams. He is a book author. Previously, he was an indie record music publisher, indie record label management. Welcome to the show, Howie. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Let's just start from the beginning, man. You live in New York City, is that right?
Nueva York. Yes, born and raised in the 5 boroughs of New York City.
Oh, sweet. Where are you right now? Which borough?
Live in Manhattan and sort of grew up in Queens, spent some time in Brooklyn as well, and I'm assuming I will probably never make it to Staten Island or the Bronx in terms of living there.
Any particular reason? Is there like a love-hate relationship between the boroughs?
No, it's like, Staten Island's kind of a weird place when it comes to New York. I think a lot of Staten Islanders would love to secede from the 5 boroughs, and the Bronx is actually a very, very cool place. A lot of great New York history there, and believe it or not, it's kind of the next gentrifying locale within the 5 boroughs of New York City. So I shouldn't say never when it comes to the Bronx, but I think it's safe to say never when it comes to Staten Island. Well, I mean, if you do get to live in those other boroughs, then you can make your theme song that Beastie Boys song. Yeah, I could do that, or, I would qualify, as a lot of graffiti writers would say, as an all-borough king.
Ooh, an all-borough king. That's like being an EGOT, where you win an Emmy and a Golden Globe and
something like that. But, in graffiti terms, it's about you've gotten your recognition up on the walls and the trains in all 5 boroughs. So, we'll stick with that. It seems a little cooler.
Yeah, it seems way cooler. So, you've lived in New York your whole life.
Yep.
Now, you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but were you there for 9/11?
Yeah, I was here for 9/11, and it's something that obviously I, along with every other New Yorker that was here, will never forget. It's such a crazy situation because I remember I was in bed, and I guess I'd left the TV on from the night before, so I'd fallen asleep with the television on, and you're kind of groggy, waking up in the morning, and you hear this report of a plane, hitting the World Trade Center, and immediately your mind goes to, like some little Cessna hit one of the buildings of the Twin Towers. Crazy stuff happens in New York, so you're not drawn to the story all that immediately. And as I'm, kind of waking up slowly but surely, not too long afterward, a second plane hits the other building. And by now, the news is reporting that this is a terrorist attack. And it's starting to become apparent how serious this is and what's gone on. And, you wake up pretty quickly when that stuff becomes apparent. It was a tough day and a tough period in the city, but New Yorkers are pretty tough. And, one of the things that I remember most about all of that was the sort of bonding and the unity that was a part of this city after it happened, and the things that you kind of pay attention to and care about on a day-to-day basis, sort of the distractions and the stress and stuff. It actually ceased to exist for a while because you were so consumed with like your fellow New Yorker and seeing who needed assistance and how you could help and doing anything that you could do. It was actually kind of a beautiful thing to come up such a horrible event. And I do remember that really vividly.
Man, that was a rough day. I mean, it was rough all over the country, but being right there, I can't even imagine what you guys went through.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then, after learning of the second plane and, kind of absorbing what had happened, I get a call from my best friend who was an attorney, and he works out in New Jersey but lives 3-4 blocks from where the World Trade Center is. And he calls me, and his phones were still working, and the phones in New York City were still working basically. And, he reached me and said, hey, I can't find my wife. I've been trying to reach her for a long time, and I can't get through. Would you mind trying to go down there? So I lived probably 2 miles from down there, and I quickly got dressed and started proceeding south down towards where the attack was. And I was determined to get down there, and there were, roadblocks and police barricades and stuff everywhere. And, you're kind of like, the whole walk, aside from the fact that everyone around you is also sucking in this situation and this tragedy that they're starting to understand that just occurred. And I had to lie my way through some police roadblocks and say, hey, I went out for a run and I don't have my ID and I live, down on Duane Street and, can you just let me through? And it was still so chaotic at the time that everybody let me through to find a loved one. So I got down there, and luckily I found my friend's wife. And what had happened is she's a photographer, and as soon as stuff went down, she went out and started photographing what was going on down there. And a lot of the photographs that she took are actually in many of the books that were published about that day and that event. And, thank God she was safe. But, it actually took a lot to get down there. We eventually went up on her roof where you had a view of kind of that area, and you could see a lot of the stuff that was going on. And it was just, to say it was heartbreaking is an understatement.
True. Enough about that super exciting, fun stuff.
Yeah, the cheery stuff.
Yeah, now we got that out of the way. Let's talk about you, man. What got you into music?
Music is so important to me and has been for such a long time. I remember being a little kid, probably about 6-7 years old. My dad used to go out and get the Sunday papers, but on Saturday night, because there was a sort of a candy store that was near us that had it the night before. So before I would go to bed on Saturday nights, I would go with my dad to get the papers. And I was really into wrestling at the time. And so the same store that had the papers also had all these wrestling magazines. So my dad would let me get a wrestling magazine. So I remember this one time looking at the wrestling magazines, and next to it were magazines like Cream and Hit Parader and Circus. And at that time, they had Kiss on the cover. And Kiss was still relatively new to most people. They hadn't, sort of blown up yet and become the Kiss that most people know. And I'm like, who is that freak show, in the cover of that magazine? Like, what is that? It just reminded me of very comic booky kind of stuff. But, I realized that they were a band. And so he let me get one of those magazines, and I started reading up on Kiss as well as a bunch of other bands too. But Kiss was the one that intrigued me the most. And then not too long after, I convinced my parents to buy me a couple of Kiss albums. So by this point, it's probably 1976, so Destroyer was out. So they got me Destroyer and Alive on the same day. And I just went home and I tore that shrink wrap off of those albums, and I just listened to them for hours. And the other thing I was doing is I'm looking at everything within the packaging. So I'm looking at the photos, I'm reading the liner notes, and I'm just fascinated. I knew I didn't know how, but I did know at that point my life had changed for the better and tremendously.
You were talking about the liner notes. Didn't they used to give Grammys for liner notes?
Well, certainly I think there may still be one for album packaging, but, at the end of the day, that means so much less and less now. I know that vinyl has kind of made a little bit of a comeback in this, that, and the other thing, but, you used to buy records exclusively on vinyl, and so you had this much larger canvas with which to absorb imagery for any given artist. So you had this front cover that was 12 by 12, and you had the cover art, and you had the back cover, and you had the inner sleeve, and in Kiss's case, there was always some kind of insert, whether it was like a toy or just like a booklet or something that was just extra. I don't really know where it stands in terms of the Grammys, but if I'm not mistaken, they still actually do a Grammy for production and packaging. So that might still be intact.
Gotcha. That's cool. More as I'm older and I'm collecting Frank Sinatra records or, just different things like that. Tearing into those liner notes, you find out all these cool little tidbits that really aren't in some of the books you might read about that subject or whatever. And I just think that was a really cool way to just give a little extra.
Yeah, even if you looked at early Kiss albums, you would look at the credits of who wrote the songs, for instance, right? And you would start to notice that there were names other than Simmons, Stanley, Frehley, and Chris, right? And you're like, who are those people? Because you're a little kid. You don't really understand it quite all that well. And you realize that other people wrote songs with them. Other people performed on the records. Who were these producers? Was it the same producer on an entire album, or was it multiple producers throughout an album? There was all this stuff you wanted to know. You're looking at the logos, where could I find out things about Casablanca Records, and what is Rocksteady Management, and the companies of the gear they used had logos on their albums. And there's just so much stuff, and as a little kid, you want to know everything. And then it continued. I went to see Kiss when I was really, really young. I saw their tour in 1977 at Madison Square Garden. I was 9 years old. And, then you're at the show and you see people with laminates and passes, and you're like, what does that person do? And why do they get to go there? And what's their involvement with this? So it just kind of goes on and on. The curiosity of it just grows, and you want to know everything. And, slowly but surely, I guess you start to realize that there's this entire business and industry that surrounds all the stuff that you listen to and you go see. The curiosity peaking is just heightened to a degree you can't even believe.
Yeah, I remember, I don't remember, but my mom told me that my first concert was that 1977 Kiss tour. But, I was 3 years old, so I don't remember that.
So they just sort of brought you because they wanted to go.
Yeah, because they had us young, so they were probably 21 or 22 or something, and they were like, well, we don't have a babysitter, and I'm pretty sure that a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old were free admission back then. And
yeah, probably.
Yeah, so they were just like, fuck it, let's just take them. So I asked my dad recently, and he doesn't remember because it was kind of a long time ago. He said that it sounds about right.
I just hope they had you the industrial strength, headphones or whatever they're called that the construction workers wear, and you can get in a Home Depot or a Lowe's. Because anytime I see young kids at shows or concerts or whatever, the parents tend to put those on the heads of their kids because it does get pretty loud.
I'm 100% sure that I did not have those, and
irresponsible parents.
But come on, man.
I guess you were truly rock and roll from the time you were 3 or 4 then.
Yeah, I do remember that when I was in elementary school or whatever, I would always try and see how far I could stick my tongue out.
Everybody did that.
Yeah.
And
so I remember getting
it's so
in
funny. Is it really? And then you had a battle over was it surgically altered or is that really his tongue? And you went through all that stuff too, because you're like, how could it possibly be that long? Mine isn't anywhere near that long. Right.
I think the popular theory at the time was that they had cut that little tendon or whatever right under your tongue.
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome.
I remember hearing all kinds of stories about that.
All kinds of stuff, and that was before the internet, and word just spread everywhere.
That's right. You read, like, again, but back to the magazines. I mean, that's ultimately where you would read about a story like that. And the other quest at that time was like, the photo of them unmasked and having the first published photo of them without the makeup on.
Right. So how did you react? Because you're Jewish, right?
Yeah, I know where you're going to go, but go ahead and ask.
How did you react when you found out that those crazy masked rock and roll dudes were Jews from New York like you?
Well, it's so funny because, like, I knew that they were New Yorkers. That part I knew, but I didn't immediately know that they were Jewish, Paul and Gene. But then, you start reading and you're like, oh, because while you didn't find the photos of them unmasked so quickly, you did get their real names. Their real names would pop up in magazine articles a lot. And then you're like Stanley Eisen and Gene Klein. And Klein could be German, but it was sort of safe to assume that both were Jewish. And then you realize that actually Gene's real name is Chaim Weitz, and you're like, oh, he's really, really Jewish.
He's extra Jewish.
His dad was Israeli, his mom was Hungarian. It's funny. Like, I think any sort of race or religion loves to gravitate towards people that are, similar to them. And I know that my Jewish family definitely did things like that. So you get like a little extra proud about it, but it was sort of like something that I found fascinating for about a minute. And then 2 seconds later it was like, okay, great, whatever. I was equally proud that they were from New York.
Oh, cool. So growing up, I guess you met some dudes in high school that you became friends with? And
yeah, I mean, in and outside of the music world. So I had my friends in junior high school even that were into similar music, let's say, that I was into. So I had that crew that I ran around with, and we were always kind of on a quest to find like that next thing. We all went from sort of like the Kiss, Black Sabbath stuff, and then sort of by around 1980, a friend's older brother introduces us to this band called Iron Maiden, and you're like, oh my God, like I've never heard anything like this. This is taking the things that we like to an entire other level. And so there was that. You really start getting deeply into sort of collecting records and buying records and reading even more magazines and finding magazines that are from other countries. So around that time, we started reading Kerrang from the UK, which covered a lot of the stuff that we loved. And, you found out about a lot of bands. And, you also start realizing that there's this kind of underground to this music, whether it's metal or punk or whatever. And you start corresponding with these pen pals, and later you start trading demo tapes and live shows of the bands that you like that are hard to find. And at that point, when you're looking for music, you have to work kind of hard. Again, there's no internet, so you can't just sort of hit Google with a band's name and just find all this stuff. You had to find other people that knew more than you did. And, there were all these like-minded people. And through that, you even started meeting some of the bands, the more underground bands. And being in New York City and being involved in the metal scene, being involved in the hardcore scene later especially, you really just meet a ton of people and you're networking and you don't even realize that that's what you're doing. And everybody needs help because they're young. There's not a bunch of money involved in what they're doing. They don't have managers. They don't have agents. One of your quests was to, can I carry your gear into the club and you put me on the guest list? And as an underage kid who really wasn't even supposed to be getting into any of these clubs, at that time yet, that was a big deal. And you got to see a lot of bands and a lot of shows and meet a lot of people. Slowly but surely, I'm starting to realize that I'm kind of becoming a part of this movement and this business. And I was totally into it in the same way that I was reading the Kiss liner notes. Now I'm kind of almost involved. And I was always looking to figure out how to get more involved.
So carrying gear when you were young like that, is that how you met Nuclear Assault?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Danny Lilker and John Connolly lived right near me, maybe about 5 minutes away, a town over from where I grew up. And so we knew that they were from Queens as well, and we were fans. I mean, we knew that Dan had been in Anthrax. We learned that John Connolly was in Anthrax for 2 minutes as well, but, Dan Lilker was such a huge part of early Anthrax. He wrote a ton of the songs on the first album, and he and Scott were kind of like a team putting together that band and that sound that they had and those songs. So just by hanging out and going to shows, I knew who they were, and we would approach them. And the easiest thing that happened was a friend of mine from school and I did a fanzine called Occasional Irregularity, and we covered this music. So we would approach some of these people that you would see at Lemoore in Brooklyn or at the hardcore matinees at CBGBs, and we would write about them. So that's one way that we really got to know them, and they got to know us as well. Dan and John became really good friends, and I sort of began to regularly do some work for them. So we dubbed their Live, Suffer, Die demo in my house on my boombox. Like, that's how we would make copies of their demo to go sell at shows or at, some of the local record stores. We did the fanzine. We would basically roadie for them, and it was pretty much for free, but we were getting into the shows, and that was good enough for us. And I met the Anthrax guys, similarly, and then later on, guys from Agnostic Front and the Crumbsuckers, and you basically just did what you could to be involved. And again, because all these groups needed some level of assistance, it worked out great because it was a mutually beneficial relationship. So as I became better friends with Nuclear Assault, one day I go with them to a meeting at their record label. This is about, 1986. They had just put out Game Over through Combat, and they weren't that happy about the way the label was handling the album. So I'm sitting in this meeting with them, and they're kind of going off on how unhappy they are. And I don't remember if it was Dan or John, but they're like, you see Howie? Howie could market us better than the people you have here. You should fire who we have, and you should hire him. And I'm like, whoa, what the fuck just happened? I thought I just sort of gave you a ride here, And now I'm having a conversation with the president of the label, and he's like, all right, you snot-nosed kids, like, what do you have to say, So I'm just sort of chatting with him. I don't even remember what I said to him for the most part. He's like, wait, let me ask a question. How old are you? And I'm like, I'm 16. He goes, all right, first of all, I'm not going to be responsible for a 16-year-old leaving high school to come work here, so that's not happening. But when you graduate, if you want, give me a call, and maybe we could find something for you. Fast forward, graduate high school, I went to a year of college, did the very typical, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here, but I know I'm very passionate about music and this music business, and I'd love to be involved. And I gave him a call, and within a few weeks of badgering him, he gave me a job as a salesman for the distributor, which was the parent company of Combat and also Relativity Records, called Important Record Distributors. And I was a salesperson peddling their titles into independent record stores. And that was my first quote-unquote real job in the music business. And it all came about from that chance weird meeting I had with the Nuclear Assault guys at the label.
That sounds amazing. So you're just like going, I don't know, like sort of like a door-to-door salesman, but to these mom-and-pop record shops?
And it was a little door-to-door, but it was mostly on the phone. You had your list of accounts that you sold to. And Important obviously had their in-house labels of Combat and Relativity, but they also distributed a whole bunch of other labels. So you were selling all of that stuff to these stores. You had Epitaph Records, there was Revelation Records at the time, Enigma. There was a whole bunch of different labels. Your job was to sell these titles into these stores. And one of the most grounding experiences that you could have is when you start to realize that you're selling to these stores that are these mom and pop stores, and that ultimately they're going to sell whatever is going to make them money. Like, they don't really care about your cool underground band and, all that stuff. They're just like, if I can sell a lot of Michael Jackson records, I'm just going to fill my store with Michael Jackson records, and that's what I'm going to sell. So you really had to work with stores that had an ear for this kind of stuff, like the underground metal stuff and punk and hardcore stuff and, some of the imports that the company was still selling. And when you worked with those stores and you connected with them and they had clientele that would come into their store looking for this kind of stuff, then it really started to go well, and you started to get an idea of which of these stores were really supporting what I thought was the future, underground, aggressive, hard music. And so that was a great lesson for for no other reason. And I did that for a bunch of months, and it was a really, really valuable thing to have gone through.
That sounds cool. Before I go on, I just want to backtrack a little bit. When you were in New York, did you ever hang out at CBGB's?
Oh, of course. I mean, CBGB's felt like a second home there for a while, probably from the time I was 16 until, I don't know, like 1990-ish. They had the hardcore matinees, and I think in all of that time, years, I would say I missed 2 or 3 total Sunday hardcore matinees, and they were amazing because it was every single Sunday, same time, $5, usually 4 bands, and sometimes there were just these amazing shows that you just were amped all week to go to, and then sometimes you just were going to go to hang out because one of the beauties of those CBGB's matinees was hanging out outside with all your friends. Outside was like this virtual flea market. You had bands selling demos, selling their shirts, and people with their fanzines, myself included, trying to sell fanzines outside the shows. So it was this experience, it was this sort of cultural experience or subcultural experience, if you want to call it that. So sometimes you didn't even care who was playing, but you went anyway because it was this regular gathering place for like-minded people who dug this music and wanted to be a part of this camaraderie and this community that had formed there, and that was an amazing time. And I went to some of the evening shows at CB's too, but they didn't always have like the bands that you really wanted to see as a fan of this kind of music. But you'd go at night as well, but it was really about those Sunday matinees that I think me and my friends were the most into.
The guy who owned it and ran it, what was his name?
Hilly Crystal.
Did you ever meet him? Like, was he there?
Yeah, I mean, I actually interviewed him at one point. He was there pretty often. He was there more so for the night shows and the stuff that went on during the week than he was for the matinees. But a lot of his family worked at the club as well. There was always some member of the Crystal family in the building when you were there. And he was a really nice guy, very soft-spoken, very laid back. And when eventually they named the corner of CBGB's Joey Ramone Place after Joey Ramone passed, I did an article about that entire situation for the Village Voice. And I went to the venue really, really early, and Hilly was there, and he was basically there by himself. So it was still a few hours away from all the people coming and the press that showed up. And I got to sit with him and really talk to him about the club and the value of the Ramones, and how important they were to him and to the club and to New York. And that was amazing. Talking to him was a great, great experience for me. And, I missed that club tremendously.
Wow. Okay, so thank you for backtracking with me.
Yeah.
So you're at Important Records, and I'm assuming that didn't last too long.
Yeah, I wasn't there for too long. I started in 88, and I was done by 92.
Oh, okay.
Sony buys the place, and a lot of us got the boot.
Shocker. Way to go, Sony. So then how did you get to In Effect Records?
Well, In Effect was there. So In Effect was something that we formed while I was there, that we formed in 1988. And again, I was a salesman for the parent company, which was Important Record Distributors, and they had Combat and Relativity. And, I started to notice that I was a big fan of hardcore and a big part of the hardcore scene here in New York. And I started to realize that heavy metal got a lot of attention, and rightly so. But there were also a lot of these great hardcore bands that were gaining a lot of attention, that were incredible bands, that also deserved the same type of attention that Combat was paying to sort of like the death metal bands that they had, which, again, I think it was just easier to market metal. There was something about it that just made it kind of more of a natural fit for press and for other aspects of marketing. And I became friendly with the head of purchasing at Important. His name is Alan Becker. He's still there, actually. And basically talking to him about, all these hardcore bands some of them sell really, really well, and nobody's paying attention to them. They're kind of getting ghettoized somehow as being lesser than. And I didn't understand that. So you had a band like Agnostic Front on Combat who initially did really great for the label, but then when the regime sort of changed over and there were different people there, they were getting less and less attention, but they were still a much bigger band than a lot of the bands that the label were putting money into. And so I started talking to Alan Becker about, this idea of starting a new imprint there, a third imprint that was going to be mainly for hardcore, with people running it who really cared about that stuff and knew what to do with it. It started to resonate over there, and slowly but surely, after 6 months of me being a salesman there, we launched In Effect Records. And it was with the help of, the head of purchasing for Important. And everybody was really behind it because we started with a band that was already, successful, that we thought we could make even more successful. And then we started to fill in the roster. So the first day of In Effect Records, we put out Agnostic Front's Live at CBGB's album, which did very, very well. We put out Prong's second album, Force Fed, which previously had only been available in the UK. And then because Important distributed the Roar label, which is an all-cassette label, we approached them and said, can we take the first Bad Brains album and put that out on CD for the first time? Now, this is only about a year after CDs started to become a big factor as a format for music. Only really big bands got released on CD. So if your band was getting released on CD, it was almost like a signal that the label cared about you. So we approached Roar and we cut a deal with them to put out that Roar cassette on CD for the first time. So we put all three of these records out the first day of In Effect Records, and it was a great launch to the label. And then later, we signed Sick of It All and Raw Deal, who became Killing Time, and 24/7 Spies, and a band called Ludachrist, who eventually became Scatterbrain. We put out a 7-inch by Madball, which was the first record they put out. Freddie, the singer, was 12 years old. And, this was obviously to go alongside with Agnostic Front because guys from Agnostic Front were in Madball at the time. And then, to top it all off, I get to put out a Nuclear Assault album because we were able to take them from Combat and put them on In Effect too, and we put out their most successful album and arguably their best, which was Handle with Care. So as far as the full circle of the whole thing, went from snot-nosed 16-year-old kid meeting with the president of the label to putting out their biggest album for all intents and purposes on that label. It was an amazing time and an amazing experience, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned a ton, and it was great, and I'm really proud of that time, and it's amazing to me, how many people still care about all that.
That sounds like a really fucking fun journey.
It certainly was.
So how did you transition into writing books?
I worked at various labels, for the next bunch of years. I was at Roadrunner Records. I went over to Jive Records and Zomba Publishing. I worked at the Warner Music Group. And then in 2007, by that time, the music business, or at least the record business, had changed really, really drastically. The download stuff was becoming a huge factor, and I think that the record business particularly handled that really poorly and weren't willing to grow with it. They just started sort of suing everybody, and the whole thing was kind of a mess. So I wound up not working in the record business any longer. I started managing artists. I was working with various people. I just did all kinds of different things. And as I was doing that, to keep myself interested, I started to work completely on a whim on a book about really left field heavy metal lists. And it came about from a conversation with a couple of friends of mine, namely Ill Bill, who's a rapper, and Vinny Paz, who's also a rapper. But they're both like metal encyclopedias and super fans. And we would always have those like, oh, that fucking album cover is the worst, but that's a great album. But that album cover, like, it almost made me not buy it. And like, why do people like that band so much? And that guitarist is great, or that guitarist sucks. Or started having those types of sort of sitting in a bar, having a beer kind of conversations. And I was like, that's a great idea for a book. So I remembered that a friend of mine, Sasha Jenkins, had done a book very similar, but about rap. And it was called The Book of Rap Lists. And I loved that book because also growing up as a hip-hop fan, it went deep. It wasn't about just the surface stuff. Like, you had to really, really know your shit to be able to absorb that book properly. And I approached him and I said, what do you think about doing like a metal version of that book? And he was into it. But he's a real author. He's done like real books. I'd never done anything like that before. So we went to his agent and he told us how to put the proposal together, and we did it, and we got a book publishing deal in 3 weeks, which was shocking to us. We didn't know what to make of what we were doing. We just thought it was fun. And so we published our first book, and that was my first book, which was The Merciless Book of Metal Lists. The publishing company, ironically, was called Abrams. So people would always ask me if I self-published, and I was like, no, that's a real publishing company. They do the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, and they put out our first book, and that was an amazing experience. I got to keep my toe in the music water, but at the same time present it in a different way. That was the kickoff to starting books.
Okay, well, what other books? What was next?
Yeah, so, that's a funny question because we finished the Merciless Book of Metal Lists, and then I started to realize that Sasha's agent is now my agent. And I meet with him after I was probably picking up like my check for the book. Like the book is done, and like I'm like, okay, it's off, and PR and marketing's going to do their thing, whatever. And he goes, so what are you going to do next? And I'm like, what do you mean next? I thought that was it. I just was going to do this one-off thing and then go find a real job. And he's like, well, I know someone looking for a writer for a project. I'm going to throw your name in there and let's just see what happens. So long story short, it was for a book about the 20th anniversary of the Vans Warped Tour. When he tells me that, I said, well, I'm friends with Kevin Lyman, who's the founder of the tour. Is that who's the person looking for the writer? And he said, yeah. I was like, I guess, well, that's not going to hurt my chances much, right? And he's like, no. I was like, all right, well, make sure he knows that I'm one of the people who wants to do it. And I got hired to do that book. So I did that book. Ultimately, it was sold by the Warped Tour. So they sold it on the tour and through their merchandise company and, all that stuff. So I did that book. And then I get a call from a former Roadrunner Records colleague. And he's like, hey, I got your Metal List book, and I'm having flashbacks, and it's so great, and I love it, and congratulations. And he's like, you have any idea what Case Wessels is up to? And Case was the owner of Roadrunner. A couple of years prior, he sold Roadrunner to Warner Music. So I was like, I don't know what he's doing. I'm assuming he's counting money, And he's like an older guy who lives in the Netherlands. Why would I know what he's doing? So he's like, hey, he's in the book business. He's actually buying book publishing companies in Europe. I'm like, get out of here. He's like, you just wrote a book, and he's in the book publishing business and all this stuff. He goes, you should reconnect with him. And I'm like, yeah, I guess why not, So I get in touch with him, and I figure we're going to have a 10-minute conversation. It's going to end with, have a nice life. And we kind of hatched this idea to start a music publishing book imprint very similar to the early 80s independent record labels. So in the early 80s, you had your Roadrunners and your Combats and your Metal Blades and your Epitaphs and those types of labels. And there was only like a handful of people that really knew there was value in those types of bands, right? So we wanted to be a book company that would do the same thing, that people grew up with these groups and now they actually want to know about who these people are and what their lives are like. So we created this imprint called Lesser Gods. He asked me to make sort of a wish list of people I would want to do books about. The top of my list was HR from the Bad Brains. I'm a friggin' Bad Brains super fan. Like, it's ridiculous. They're my favorite band of all time. I got a Bad Brains tattoo on my leg. I mean, they're my favorite band. And the singer, HR, who I'd met once or twice, but very briefly over the years, is this just enigma. There's so many rumors and so many myths about him. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So through a bunch of different channels, a guy named James Lathos, who had already been working on a documentary about HR, I contacted him. And I said, hey, how you feel about working together on this HR book that could be maybe a companion to your movie? And we did the deal, and we created Finding Joseph I, an oral history of HR from Bad Brains. And the reason we did oral history form is because, as you find out in the film and the book, HR is a diagnosed schizophrenic. He's just an eccentric guy, but I love him, and he's an incredible soul and human being, but he doesn't remember a lot of the things that he's gone through over the years, either properly or thoroughly enough. So we went oral history because we wanted to surround his voice with the voice of people that he's influenced, people he's made music with, band members that just love the Bad Brains. So you have everybody from Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses to members of the Cro-Mags and Murphy's Law, Questlove from The Roots, all kinds of different people, talking about HR and the influence he's had and the influence of the Bad Brains and their experiences with him and the band. And I'm really, really proud of it. I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. I just think Finding Joseph I, the book, and the documentary film has been cathartic for HR. I think it's been an opportunity for him to look at his own life in a way that most people don't get to. He's gotten to hear what his peers think of him, about things that he's done or music that he's made or all of these things. it's just been a big positive for him. And I think something for a long time for him was just wanting to know that people had love for him and appreciated him. And I think that this project has allowed for him to maybe understand that better than ever now. He's had brain surgery. His schizophrenia is pretty under control. He's just living a much better, happier life than he was when this project started. And it's just great to know.
You had mentioned he has a pretty strong relationship with God.
I think he's always viewed himself as this messenger of God. Everything he does, so singing in the Bad Brains, doing his reggae records, all this stuff is delivering a message of God, which is very, very important to him. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I do connect with his passion and his positivity. Even the concept of PMA, positive mental attitude, that gets thrown around like so much. Like you could buy a shirt in a souvenir shop that has PMA on it now. I mean, that was popularized by him, and it comes from a book that he read when he was a teenager by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. And this concept of PMA and positive mental attitude, whatever the mind can believe and conceive, the mind can achieve. I think that's the saying. And so it's about, being able to get things done and be positive and move in a forward direction and be a productive person, whether that's financially, emotionally, philanthropically, whatever it is, just giving and being positive is really important. And that's who he is. That's what he's about. I just respect him immensely, and I'm glad I've gotten to know him the way I have over the last few years.
That's kick-ass. Okay, how about best concert, worst concert?
That's a good one. All right, so I was talking about the best shows I've ever seen were Bad Brains shows.
Let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
I've heard it both ways. Is it Bad Brains or The Bad Brains?
Well, I mean, the name of the band is Bad Brains. I think in the same way that the Ramones is actually Ramones. But so many people just refer to them as the Bad Brains. But if you look at their albums, there's no the in the name of the band, It's Bad Brains.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so sorry, back to best worst.
Yeah, so my favorite shows ever are Bad Brains shows. And I guess picking one is just so nearly impossible. One that I will always remember anyway. How about the first time I ever saw them? That's a good one. And that was in 1985. They had been broken up for a couple of years, or on hiatus, however they want to explain it. And they decided to come back, and they played 2 nights at a venue in Manhattan called the Rock Hotel. And it was an actual hotel on Jane Street on the corner of the West Side Highway, which is kind of like middle of nowhere. You're basically next to a highway. And they played there, and again, they'd been away for a while. They kind of had this big high, and then HR disappeared from the band for a couple of years. But they were asked to open up this new venue and play a couple of nights. And so I'd seen plenty of shows. It's 85. I've seen lots and lots of bands. I've seen amazing shows. But that show changed the way that I saw music live. There was no band more intense. There was nobody who commanded a stage the way HR commanded a stage. The atmosphere in the room was unlike anything you've ever felt. It was so special that you could never, ever forget it. And that set of shows was clearly one of my favorite live music experiences of all time.
Wow, that's impressive. I don't know if you feel like naming them, but what's the worst concert you ever went to?
Well, it's so funny because I went to a show last night. That was one of the worst fucking things I've ever seen in my life. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this rap group called the Suicide Boys.
I have not.
You probably shouldn't. Don't bother looking for it. Your life is going to be better for not really knowing who they are. But, there's all this, SoundCloud rap stuff that's been out for the last couple of years. It's sort of, slightly less mentally ill than Juggalos.
Wow.
The music is trying to be, real legit, but it's very, bitch, ho, N-word, virtually no substance to the lyrics whatsoever. The beats are completely made to enhance drugs, which at a time in my life would have been amazing, but not now. And the show sold out. There's 1,000 people there. The group's from New Orleans. And it's not like they're completely without talent, but just the message of it, the simplicity of it, and the way the crowd reacted as if it was Beatlemania
Really?
was like, what the fuck is going on? It made you feel really old, like, you know, the parents you hear about who couldn't understand in the 50s when their kids got into rock and roll.
Right.
You know? I'm someone who loves hip-hop, who grew up with it as much as kind of anything else that I grew up with musically. And I'm seeing this, and I know that this is kind of the new trend. It's just a little bit of a shame to me that this is what people see as hip-hop now, because it's such a big term that I can't reconcile what I saw last night with what I know as hip-hop and what so many other people know as hip-hop. It was just, at the very least, a really bizarre experience.
That's hilarious. What's the weirdest thing you ever heard somebody say on stage?
I've seen Gigi Allen perform, you know? So say isn't really what I would think about Gigi Allen. It's the stuff he did at the show that, you know, in one fell swoop made the entire place run out the door and not come back.
Well, the weirdest thing I ever saw, which doesn't compare at all to that, was back in the 80s, The Cult was playing locally.
Uh-huh.
And Ian Assenberry came out on stage, and he was wearing a motorcycle helmet and leather jacket and leather pants. So he was just all in black. And then he just stood there till about halfway through the first song, not singing. And then finally he took off his helmet and he took off his jacket, and he was wearing a pink half shirt advertising Courtney Love's band Hole. And then he just kind of sat there and just looked around, and then like he never sang. And then the song was over, and you know, everybody cheered, and he said that he was happy to be here in San Antonio. He was been looking forward to it for about the past 5 minutes. And then he said, this next song makes all the guys in the audience want to fuck each other in the ass. And then they played Firewoman, and I was so confused.
Yeah, I mean, Ian definitely did some wacky stuff over the years, but, you know, if I'm thinking about, like, listen, Gigi Allen, probably every show he said or did something that, you know, people will never forget. But, you know, people would say that about HR too. Not so much in the earlier days, but, you know, a little later on when he really started to experience mental health issues, and the things that he said and the things that he did, they're inexplicable. They're just sort of inexplicable. I had always heard that story about, you know, what he did in Lawrence, Kansas, where, you know, they're playing and he thought he saw someone in the crowd with a gun, and he just took the mic stand and just bashed this person in the head with the mic stand, and then everyone else in the band, everyone around him said there was no gun. You know, he was arrested basically off the stage and taken right to jail. I mean, just shit like that. I mean, could you imagine being there and you live in Lawrence, Kansas, and you're waiting for how long to see band raids, and then this happens, show over.
Yeah, no shit. That's crazy. Did HR and Ill Bill do something together in the studio?
Yeah, they've done a couple of things together. I was working with Bill at the time, and he had always wanted to get HR on a record. Took a shot at it, invited HR, and HR showed up. So then we're like, okay, DJ Lethal, who was there, you know, at the time, and he had a studio not too far away from where the venue was. So Bill's like, Lethal, can we use your studio tonight? And of course, it would be an honor. Bill had a beats tape of things that he wanted to write to for his album. We'll listen to it on the way to the studio after the show. We'll pick 5 or 6 of them. We'll play them for HR, and whichever one he likes, you know, we'll just have him, like, vamp over. Like, just do whatever he wants, you know? And we'll Pro Tools stuff later and figure it out. We get to the studio. All he wanted was a can of Coke. You know, we paid him for the session, all that stuff, but, like, he didn't want dinner. He didn't want anything. And we play him the beats. We play him 6 different beats. And he decides he wants to sing on all of them. He did about 24 takes of vocals. And so we recorded all of it. And Bill so far has released 2 songs from the vocals recorded at that session. They're fucking great. They're absolutely great. I was in the room with him when he sang. So Bill was in the control room, and I was actually in the room with the mic with HR just to, like, so we'd have someone, you know, to communicate with if he needed anything. And to watch him sing for a few hours in the same room was like, you know, that was my first, like, cross off the bucket list thing, you know. I never even knew that could be on the bucket list. And then, you know, a few years later, I'm, like, doing his book with him, which was crazy.
So, what are some of the most profound things that you learned from doing these books about the subject of these books, like Roger or HR?
I mean, everybody's got a really unique tale to tell. You think you know, but you don't know. There's always something to learn, and I guess Roger's someone who I've been a fan of since I was really young. HR is someone who I've been a fan of since I was really young. And, to learn about their lives and seeing their inspirations, but certainly the twists and the turns and the perseverance and, the things that really make them tick, that's amazing to me. And that's why I've read books like this in the past, and that's why I want to be involved in them on a deeper level now, because everyone I know who feels the same way I do about, let's say, agnostic front, bad brains, whatever, they all want to know that stuff now. They all want to know who these people are and who they were and what put them in positions to entertain us, hang out with us, or whatever it was, and know that story. And it's just amazing to me. I think that's been the greatest part of the whole thing, is this access to information and also seeing these incredible photos that these people had of various events and times and periods.
Very cool. When I reached out for the interview, I guess you looked me up and you saw Clint Howard, so you listened to it? Is that right?
Yeah, so that was the first episode of yours that I heard. I was like, oh, that's the guy from that movie Cotton Candy. I just remember seeing that movie like when I was a kid, and he was the manager of this band Cotton Candy, which was kind of like the Nice Kids in Schools band, and they were rivals with this bad Van Halen kind of band called Rapid Fire. And Rapid Fire was kind of like terrible, but they were all flashy and got the girls and all this stuff. Clint Howard, as the manager, had to figure out, like, how are we going to defeat Rapid Fire in this battle of the bands, And that was my first, TV film encounter with Clint Howard.
I think that was the first screenplay that Clint and Ron wrote together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think they were in high school, or maybe one of them was in high school. Did you ever hear his band, the Kimpsters?
No, never.
Oh, rock on. Well, check them out.
I shall. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, I think they're all over the YouTubes. So when he was, in high school or right after high school, he was living on a street called Kemp Street, and so were all of his friends. So they called the band the Kimpsters because they all lived on the same street or close to that. They had sort of a raw punk sound, and I dig it. I had not heard of it until he gave me the CD, and I've probably listened to it 80 or 100 times. It's from the 80s. It's kind of raw, and it reminds me of when I was in school and I used to listen, people would give me bootleg Sex Pistols stuff. It kind of reminds me. Right. It's real gritty, and it wasn't. I don't think it was recorded in a studio. It was with a boombox or some shit at a show. But it's really cool.
I got to check that out. I didn't even know he was in a band.
Yeah, he was a singer too, so he was a little wild and crazy.
I got to check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Good tip.
Yeah. The way that I found you was, so on Instagram, I follow Everlast.
Yeah.
And he, I guess, liked, or whatever it's called on Instagram when you retweet something. I guess it's liking.
Yeah, he retweeted, and then he actually posted something about the book as well.
So maybe it was the post. So I saw the post or whatever about this. Well, tell us about the book.
Yeah, well, I recently put together a book with a really good friend of mine who I've known for 30 years. He's an old graffiti writer named Caves. His real name is Michael McClear. Tattooist, an artist. He has a restaurant. I mean, he's a Renaissance man. But first and foremost, he's a tremendous artist. I used to work with him at his tattoo shop. I managed the shop, but at the same time, I helped manage him because he was starting to get offers to do sort of corporate street art kind of stuff, for companies. So he did the Beaujolais Nouveau wine label a few years back. He's done projects for Jaguar, for Gretsch guitars, for Adidas sneakers. He was doing all kinds of projects like that, needed help. So I was working with him on that. And, in the downtime of the shop, you got plenty of time to, sort of brainstorm and incubate these ideas. We were sort of surprised that while there were a whole bunch of children's hip hop books, there were no hip hop alphabet books. And we were really surprised by that. We're both dads. And at the time, our kids were young. Some of his kids were young. My child was very young because we came up with the idea about 7 years ago. So my daughter was 2. And we were like, like when you find a great children's book and you're engaged as well, so it's not just, something you feel you're supposed to read to your kid, but you dig it too. A hip-hop alphabet book would be amazing. There's so many parents like our age grew up with the golden age, let's say, of rap music, especially East Coast stuff and late 80s, early 90s stuff. Wouldn't it be great to create this? So we came up with this idea, but we had no outlet for it. And we even shopped it to book publishers, and people just didn't get it. It was so strange. They were like, is it for the adults? Is it for kids? Is it really an alphabet book? Or is it just some reminiscing device for adults? What is it? Which is basically taking the 26 letters of the alphabet and presenting it in rhyme and graffiti form. And it's the first children's book that I've ever had anything to do with. So it came out about 5 weeks ago, and, we've had some really great success with it so far, and people seem to be really digging the book. It's been fun promoting it, and just, did our first bunch of signing events and stuff, and it's just going on, and we have more to do. If you do get it, you do like it, please review it on Amazon. That stuff happens to matter. Like Amazon does look at, how many people review a book positively and those types of things. So, it's actually important to try to follow through. Not that you're obligated, but going through Steve's site and then, trying to review the book if you really did it. And be honest, not saying give it a great review. I'm just asking you to review it. This has been also another amazing journey. So I guess I write books for a living now, I think.
That sounds like. That's how I found you, was through that Hip Hop Alphabet book, which I bought.
Yeah.
I bought a dozen of, and we're giving them to every household in my family that has small children.
I noticed that you did that, and I really appreciate it, because it's like, to us, it is like a gift book, like anybody who has a baby or whatever, like give it to them,
Well, even my wife, who, she was never really into hip hop, and she didn't really know who some of those people are, but she was looking at this book and she was like, this is a piece of art. This is amazing. And
I appreciate that. You could tell her I appreciate that, please.
Absolutely. It was really her idea to give them to all of the families for Christmas. I just bought a dozen of them because I wanted a dozen of them, and you were cool enough to sign them. You were cool enough to autograph them all, and I really appreciate that. That makes it a little bit more special.
No, my pleasure. I'm like, geez, you bought 12 copies. Like, bought a couple of dinners for my daughter.
That's awesome. So I don't want to keep you too much longer. Again, I appreciate your time. Can you real quick just run off the titles of the books that you have written that are available?
Yeah, so all 4 are available. I've done 4 books in the last 4 years. First one being The Merciless Book of Metal Lists, which I did with Sasha Jenkins. The second is called Misfits Summer Camp, 20 Years on the Road with the Vans Warped Tour, which I did with the tour's founder, Kevin Lyman. The third book is Finding Joseph I, an oral history of HR from Bad Brains, and I did that with James Lathos. And then most recently with my man Caves, his real name being Michael McClear, I did Hip Hop Alphabet, and that's what we're working right now, doing signings and readings and events and promotion. And, we actually just got a great promo piece that we put up online with DMC from Run DMC helping to promote the book, and he wrote the foreword for the book. And another important part of that is we are donating a portion of the proceeds from each sale to the Jam Master Jay Foundation for Music, which helps underserved public schools with their music and arts programs, which, as we know, are rapidly disappearing across the country. And whether they develop the program for them or they help buy instruments or whatever they can do, they're doing some great work, and we're proud to be affiliated with them on this book and helping them out as well.
That's kick-ass. So are all of these books available on Amazon?
Yeah, everything is available on Amazon. The only version of the Warped Tour book on Amazon is the digital, but if you go to Kings Road Merchandise, if you Google it, or you can go to the Warped Tour site, you can find the physical copies of the Warped Tour book as well. And it's interesting because 2018 is going to be the final year of the Warped Tour, so this is going to be the last run. So it's a nice package in terms of putting a neat little bow on a lot of what's happened on that tour. And, you forget like some of the huge artists that made a giant impact on the road with them over the years. I mean, Katy Perry being one of them, Eminem and Blink-182 and No Doubt and all these bands that got really big. Some of their very first tours, if not their very first tour, was the Warped Tour, and they're all in the book.
So everybody, go buy those books, and if you're going to get them on Amazon, go to this podcast's website, which is fascinationstreetpod.com, and click on that Amazon banner. It'll help me out just a little bit. Let's get that done. But I am giving away 2 autographed copies of the Hip Hop Alphabet. So when this episode comes out, the first 2 people to tweet at Fascination Street Pod and at Howie Abrams with, just say, hey, I want one. DM me and we'll get it to you. What's your Twitter address?
I'm at HowNice212. That's my rapper name.
That's your nice. All right. So, are you working on My Riot?
I helped edit My Riot a little bit. That was another book that I brought into the publisher. So that was, through my relationship with Roger. But I definitely contributed a little bit to that book and helped edit it and stuff. But that's not a book that I wrote. That was written by a guy named John Wiederhorn, who's written some great books. He did Scott Ian's book. He did Al Jorgensen from Ministry's book. And he did another great book called Louder Than Hell, which is this collection of interviews with all your favorite kind of rock stars,
Cool. And just so that everybody's clear, Roger is from Agnostic Front and HR is from Bad Brain.
Correctamundo. All
right. Well, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the various social medias?
Yeah, I don't know all the web addresses, but I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Usually if you search by real name, obviously if you search by real name on Facebook, you'll find me. Same thing with Instagram. I'm on Twitter as How Nice. That's the only handle I think I know. I think I'm How Nice212 on Instagram. And but you can always find me. I do respond, as you know. It's always fun to chat with people. And the other thing is I do this weekly radio show with Ill Bill that we do on Thursdays from 3 to 5 on a station called Bushwick Radio, which you can find at bushwickradio.nyc. Previous episodes are up there if you want to listen to it. The show is called Merciless. It's basically a metal and hardcore show done by me and a rapper. So it's actually a really fun show. Bill and I have been friends for a long time, and we kind of share mind when it comes to aggressive music. It's fun to do a show like that with somebody from a very different perspective.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad you brought up the radio show, because I was going to bring it up after your plugs if you didn't. So thank you.
No problem.
All right, man. I think that's going to do it.
Well, Steve, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and definitely check out Clint Howard's music. And if you can't find it, let me know.
Oh, I'm going to the Kempsters?
Yeah, Kempsters. And if you can't find it, let me know and I'll send it to you.
Oh, that'd be great. I got to go look for that.
You really do. And in the back of your mind, think about maybe what a book would look like about that dude.
I know. It's interesting, right?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. He's a pretty good guy. Hey,
I like him as an actor, too.
Oh, he's so good as an actor. I love it so much. Okay, man. Thank you again so much, Howie Abrams. You have a great night, man.
My pleasure, Steve. You too.
Thanks, man. Hey, guys. If you like what I'm doing, rate and review the podcast on iTunes and wherever else you're getting the podcast. And if you do order things from Amazon, it would really help me out if you use that Amazon banner that's on the website at fascinationstreetpod.com and just click through whenever you're buying stuff from Amazon. You can click through the first time and then save that to your favorites or bookmark it, and every time you use it, you don't have to go to the website to get there. I appreciate it, guys. Enjoy. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.